Hello and welcome to the Hockey Hub podcast. Glad you could join us for a Phil Esposito episode, number 7. That's right. My math right, Judd? It's episode number 7.
Early Raymond Bork.
There you go.
He switched.
There you go. That's right. Adam Pellerin and Judd Sirott here with you, getting ready for the matchup against the Philadelphia Flyers, which will close out the Bruins homestand. They'll hit the road once again, take on the Hurricanes, and then the Flyers for a Saturday matinee, gearing up for back-to-back against the Kraken. But that's all getting ahead of ourselves. We'll look at the matchup against the Flyers, of course. But Judd, Stanley Cup back on, baby. Now it's back on. Win over the Maple Leafs. All is right with the world. Nothing wrong. Nothing to see here. It's all good. But that's kind of ridiculous, right? It was also sort of ridiculous to say that this team is not going to be any good after 8 games of the year. It's equally ridiculous to say that everything's fixed after a win over the Maple Leafs. I think what you can say is that it was a step in the right direction.
Just hearing you say that, I remember having a conversation with some of the Toronto people. I think it was after they beat the Tampa Bay Lightning, and they did it convincingly. And what I was told was they started to plan the parade route. So that's a little bit more of a Canadian market. Certainly maybe the Leafs fans are, not here in the last decade with the Canadians fans. But I think for the Bruins, listen, they're working their way through some things here, Adam, that they really haven't had to do here in the last couple of seasons. And it is a process. But I think one of the things, looking ahead to that last game against the Philadelphia Flyers to close out the homestand, can you back up the effort that you had against Toronto? It wasn't a perfect effort, but it was really good. I think you can argue it was probably their best of the season. They had a really good outing to start a 3-game road trip against the Colorado Avalanche, but they didn't follow it up. Can they do it this time and then start to carry a little bit momentum into the end of the month and maybe into November?
Yeah, that's the question, right? Can you build from this? Because you mentioned the win over the Colorado Avalanche, and that was a good 5-on-5 game for the Bruins, of course, allowing the 3 power play goals. By the way, a very good Avalanche team, and an Avalanche team that's now playing well. So you played them at the right time, able to get those 2 points, and then obviously struggled for the rest of the road trip. You come back home, you lose to the Stars, and that was just a disaster of a second period that we've talked about. And then to come back against the Maple Leafs was certainly progress. And I think we saw, too, at practice, Judd, on Monday, Jim Montgomery not taking his foot off the gas pedal, right? You heard the head coach a lot on the ice in that practice on Monday.
He was definitely very vocal. You and I both had a chance to take that in, and I know we're going to talk a little bit further about Jim Montgomery trying to set the right tone. But the other thing that I think about on the heels of that game against the Maple Leafs that you really like, that you'd like to see going forward, that was maybe the first game all year where the Bruins played the way that they wanted to play, the way they're designed. So up front, what did Jim Montgomery talk about? We're going to have 2 200-foot lines. Those top 2 lines played like that. And then 2 lines that are going to be a bear to play against at 200 feet. And those are your bottom 2 lines. And the Bruins certainly got some key production out of those 2 lines to tie and then put you in front at the end of 40 minutes. And then defensively, so the Bruins only allowed 23 shots in that game to a really good offensive Toronto Maple Leafs team. And I understand early in the season, the Leafs have not clicked offensively the way they have wanted to. But structurally and the way they played, and they were so stingy, the way they checked pucks back, that was the other thing that you and I had a chance when we both listened to Jim Montgomery at Monday's practice where he talked about that's the first game that I've seen of the first 9 where they've really played to their identity. Can they keep sustaining that?
Yeah, Jim Montgomery said that the puck pressure was good, probably the best it's been all year long, but it's still a work in progress. It's something that he talked about. He said the forwards have to get better in that department, help the D-men, which will create better gaps, and someone has to pressure the puck is what he had said during the practice or after the practice session on Monday. But the one thing too that I think is a check in the Bruins' favor in that game is, a couple of check marks. I'd say going into that game, Judd, we talked about the Bruins being desperate for a win. They had lost 3 straight games. Of course, they got the point in Utah, but it's a 3-game losing streak. Toronto came into that game losing the last 2, right? They had lost back-to-back games. They had lost to Columbus 6-2. And then they had lost to St. Louis 5-1 in a game where Craig Berube, new head coach of the Maple Leafs, was facing his former team for the first time. So you know that that's a game that he really wanted, and his team just fell flat. And so the Bruins come into TD Garden facing a Maple Leafs team that was desperate for a win. They were hungry for a win. And I think that, in that game, we saw the Bruins fall behind 1-0, right? They played a great first period. And I think that really jumped off the page. Great first period by the Bruins. But what also jumped off the page was how badly that it started in the second period, giving up a goal that probably shouldn't happen to Matthew Nyes. And you fall down 1-0, you respond, but then you fall down 2-1. Right, so you have to deal with two deficits in that game, and the Bruins able to come back twice. And what's more, Judd, and I know we'll talk about Brad Marchand, is the fact that the Leafs came back to tie it late. And you have to play the last couple of minutes to get into overtime, and then you're able to win. So you come back from two deficits. Your first team that's hungry, two deficits in the game. They tie it late, but you'll walk away with the 2 points. That's a good thing.
Absolutely, and I think that they definitely earned the 2 points in that one. They certainly earned the point. Granted, you wanted to be able to finish off in regulation, but I think the better team on Saturday night at TD Garden walked away with the 2 points. The Bruins were the better team territorially, and you mentioned the start that they had. If memory serves, it wasn't just the shots, but it was the attempts. How much ice they owned and how much they played either three-quarter ice or half ice in the Toronto Maple Leafs end. They had a ton of chances. And the Leafs, they blocked a lot of shots early. They got in lanes. They were committed. Anthony Stolarz made some key saves, and the Bruins got off to the start that they wanted. Could they sustain that in the second period? Not necessarily. And maybe in the bigger picture, and we can really have this discussion. So everybody talks about, we want to play a 60-minute game. And that's the goal, but it's really, on a night-in, night-out basis, that is really unattainable because the other team is going to have its push. And the Maple Leafs certainly had that push. So how do you deal with that push from the opponent? How long is that push? What does it take for you to reclaim some of that momentum? And for the Bruins, they got it on goals by Brazeau and Kastelik and ultimately won it on a Brad Marchand tally.
Which was great to see. Well, a couple of different things were great to see. One, that the bottom six was able to contribute, and that fourth line continues to be such a great story for the Bruins this year. How about that pass from Johnny Beecher? We have Saturday Sound here on Nesson where we mic up a player, and we mic up the head coach for the starting lineup, which we'll get to, and we'll talk about Jim Montgomery and the starting lineup coming up, and just there's more to it than just announcing the starting lineup. We're going to have that discussion as well. But Matt Poitras was mic'd up for Saturday Sound, and we played some of that, and one of them was him on the bench to Johnny Beecher saying, "Backhand no look, sick," right? to Kastelik. I think he said nasty, which was pretty cool. A couple of young guys who made their NHL debut together last year on the bench having that conversation, which was pretty good. And speaking of young guys, Justin Brazeau, who was such a good story last year, Judd. Finally got his first his first NHL or AHL contract, a two-way contract. He played in the ECHL, came from the Maple Leafs organization, played for the Marlies, and finally gets his opportunity with the Bruins last year, and was very good for them, and then was a factor in the playoffs as well. And so now the bar is sort of raised in terms of expectations for him going into the year, and he gets off to a bit of a slow start. But over the last two games, he has a couple of goals, and he's playing to his identity, which is great to see.
Big kid, long stick. The other thing that Jim Montgomery had mentioned when you and I had a chance to listen to him on Monday is that he owned the front of the net, that he's using that size a little bit more effectively. Remember, he's a young guy. He's still learning his way in the National Hockey League. What did he play last year? If I look at my numbers, he only played 19 games with the Bruins. So I think technically he's probably, based on age, I don't know if the National Hockey League considers him a rookie, but if he were younger, I guarantee you he would be considered a rookie here in the National Hockey League. So he still has a lot to learn. How quickly can he bounce back from early in the season? And he had talked about it. He said there were a couple of games I lost my game. He was able to get that back. by doing some of the things that he does well, and he has some of the gifts that he's been given: his size, the stick, and the other thing is, at least for the time being, it looks like Jim Montgomery is going to put him alongside Charlie Coyle and Brad Marchand. So now he's playing an elevated role. So he has to use that hockey IQ because he's going to be playing in some different situations. So the other day, Jim Montgomery at the morning skate, I'm sure you caught it, he had a meeting with all of his lines. And I talked with Trent Frederick about it. And what he wanted to do with all those lines was just to very quickly tell them who you're going to be matched up against. So if you're playing on Marchand and Coyle's line, you're going to be matched up against a really good offensive line, certainly at home where Jim Montgomery has that last change. So if Brazeau is going to be able to maintain that spot, he not only has to do things offensively, but he also has to do things defensively and do it against some of the best players in the league.
Jim Montgomery's still working on those line combinations, which we'll get into a little bit later. It's been definitely a rotating cast on that second line right wing spot next to Charlie Coyle through the first 9 games of the year. So it'll be interesting to see what Justin Brazeau can bring to the table. And of course, part of that second line is Brad Marchand. And, I was looking it up, Judd, because I was curious. I'm like, how, so he scores his first goal of the year in the 9th game of the season. You'd have to go all the way back to the Stanley Cup year. That's the last time it took Brad Marchand to score his first goal this late into the season. He scored in his 9th game of that season as well. So we're talking a span of 13 years, right? Which is just incredible to think. But it was a weight off of his shoulders. It had to be, right. The fact that you focus on the process. I know we talk about that all the time, but you want to see the results too. And for Marchand to score not only his first goal of the year, but his first goal of the year as a game-winning goal in overtime against the Toronto Maple Leafs.
He's a big-time player, and I remember having a discussion with him last year when he was on the verge of playing his 1,000th game. And so the season prior when he came up, he got about 20 games under his belt, and he got off, as you mentioned, to a really slow start that following year. So if you look, he came up, he played his first game October 9th, 2010. The first goal did not come for almost a month on November 3rd. And one of the things that he had talked about, I've got this NHL thing down. The goals and the points are just going to come. Well, they didn't necessarily come as quickly as he would have hoped. But then after he got that first one under his belt, I think he ended up with 21 that season. And you could see that clearly some sort of a burden was lifted off of Brad Marchand that he got that first, because not only did he celebrate, and David Pastrnak celebrated too because he wasn't sure who exactly got it, but Marchand slammed his stick like, okay, it's over, this is done with, and now we can move forward.
I thought it was pasta.
So did I.
I know. I needed
to wait a little bit longer. It was so hard to tell because that puck was on top of Anthony Stolarz, on top of his black hockey pants. You got both sticks that are there, and it looked like Pastrnak got to it first, but I think Marchand got his stick on it and then lifted it under the crossbar.
And I'll tell you what, Judd, they showed multiple camera angles of it, and the overhead view. I mean, it was still hard to see. We were looking at it in postgame, and you had to really look to see. So in real time, buddy, I mean, I hope you don't feel badly about that because that's not on you, man.
Well, you've made me feel a little bit better because in real time, I wanted to be able to get that right. I want to get every call right.
Of course.
And so there's a lot of indicators that most of the play-by-play announcers will look at once those goals are scored. And an early, easy indicator is who's celebrating.
Right.
Who are the players going to? Well, they both celebrated.
Yeah.
And then Marchand slammed his stick. So my first inclination was, he thought he had it. Remember, it looked like he was going to end it in regulation and get number 402 with an empty net.
Yep.
And the puck hopped on him. Remember, it's late in the game. You got a lot of snow on the ice. He was out in the neutral zone. He had that empty net going. All right, it's right there. He's going to finish this baby off. And the puck hopped on him.
And then he got hooked.
he did. So, but those are a few indicators. And then the other indicator that you would normally get, you don't necessarily get it in overtime, is who's the first guy to go to the bench to celebrate?
Yeah.
Who's the first guy in the line? Well, everybody spills off the bench at that point.
Right.
So, that's okay. Listen, it was great to be able to get that. It certainly looked like Pastrnak, and Pastrnak was kind enough to tell Billy Jaffe after the game when he talked to him post-game, I'm not sure who had it. I hope it's Marshy. That was another thing that I really liked, just how much he's thinking about his teammate and somebody beyond himself. But it was also great to see Pastrnak open the scoring on the power play. That might have been his best game of the season. And I know one of the things that we may talk about as things go on is that the media guide does not lie.
Yeah.
Certainly with veteran players, when you have a bigger sample size, and Adam, you spent a lot of time doing Red Sox baseball. This really applies a lot to baseball players. Like if you look at Rafael Devers, you kind of have an idea of what you're going to get in a variety of categories. How many hits, how many extra base hits, how many walks, how many strikeouts. And you can do this for a lot of players, but I think a lot of that also applies with the National Hockey League when it comes to a guy like Brad Marchand or David Pastrnak, who've played in the league a long time. You have an idea of what these guys are going to get. Is it always going to be right at that number? Could it be a little bit more? Could it be a little bit less? Are there some extenuating circumstances? So you have an idea. And so it was just a matter of time before you started to see the type of production, both from Marchand and the type of play that you wanted from David Pastrnak.
And you can go around the league and say the same thing for a number of different teams to start the year for a number of different reasons. One, because, again, we're in the first month of the season. Two, because there are a lot of teams that have moving parts, obviously, in the offseason. There's a lot of new faces. I mean, just case in point, a couple of examples, most recent examples are the two teams that came to TD Garden. You have the Dallas Stars, who came into TD Garden 2 for 21 on the power play going into the game with all that talent on the ice. And what do? They score 3 power play goals. So they start to turn the corner there. Even go back further to the Colorado Avalanche. And I know they're dealing with a lot of injuries and turnover and things like that, but they still have all that talent. And, you saw the 3 power play goals scored, but in terms of the team results, they've started to win some games now. Toronto Maple Leafs, their power play clicking at about 11%. Going in with Austin Matthews, Mitch Martin, I mean, really, like all that talent. And so you look at the Bruins roster, and yes, they've struggled to start the year. Yes, there are a lot of things that need to be cleaned up, but at the end of the day, there's just too much talent on the ice. To your point, media guide doesn't lie. David Pastrnak, still an incredible talent. Of course, you see the 6 goals. I know there's some other parts of his game that need to be rounded out as well, including not taking as many penalties, right? That's a big thing for Pastrnak. Brad Marchand, yes, he's 36 years old. Yes, he's probably not going to be a 100-point scorer, but he's a guy that could give you 70 to 80 points this year. He's going to flirt with the 30-goal mark. He scored 29 goals last year, so he gets his first goal of the year. And so you start to see some of those results. And, it was good to see. It was good to see Marchand get the goal, and you could tell that they're, like I said, a weight lifted off the shoulder. And as far as the team win was concerned, that's what he talked about post-game.
It's one game, it's not going to completely turn things around, but it's a great way for us to realize that when we play the right way, we're a good team. And, that's a great group over there, very offensive, and it's a great way to start building our foundation, understanding the way that we need to play to have success, and something to build on. But, again, it's one game.
Yeah, it's just what we're talking about. It's just what we heard from Jim Montgomery. It's just what we heard from the players. It's just one game. It felt good, and it's something to build on. But, one of the things that you look at, right, what are the problems plaguing the Bruins this year? All right, they're in the penalty box way too much. A ton of turnovers, right? And we'll start with the turnover aspect of it. Against Dallas, 22 turnovers. The game before that against Nashville, 19 turnovers. The game before that against Utah, 22. Last game against the Maple Leafs, 11 giveaways, right? I mean, that's a huge key to say. When you value the puck, as Andy Brickley has said time and time again, usually good things happen.
And that's one of the things that he mentioned just before Brad Marchand talked about. He talked about that. And what happened? Now, granted, it was a tired moment. It was 3-on-3. But it was Austin Matthews who gave you that puck. And I know Craig Berube had said post-game, because I think it's always interesting to read after a game like this from both sides, from both perspectives, to get the Bruins perspective and also to get the Maple Leafs perspective. But the other thing that Craig Berube did was that he backed his captain. He's like, listen, we needed to do a better job of supporting him. Nonetheless, he gave away that puck, and he had clear possession at that point when he didn't have to do it, and he gave it right to David Pastrnak, and the Bruins were able to cash in. But I want to circle back to a couple things. The other thing that Brad Marchand had talked about, Adam, heading into the game against the Maple Leafs, is that part of the reason that the Bruins weren't getting the results was they didn't respect the game enough.
Yeah.
Some of those little details that you have to be able to do, whether that's checking with your feet, you're checking in general, how much you're valuing the puck. They started to do a little bit more about that. And one of the things that I love about the game is how honest this game is. So if you do those things, you will be rewarded, and the Bruins were.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great example moving forward, right? This is sort of what you look at if you're the Bruins through the first 9 games of the year. This is how we want to play. Are we all the way there yet? No, not all the way there yet, but look at the little things that you did in this game that you hadn't been doing for the most part through the first 8 games leading into it. And one again, the breakouts were much better. Making better decisions, in their defensive zone to break the puck out and get into the offensive zone. That was a huge thing for them, Judd.
Charlie McAvoy had talked about it, Adam, when we were on the road in Utah. Yeah. And we were talking about a little bit about what's going on defensively with the team, what's going on offensively with the team. And the first thing that he talked about is he said, for us, I feel like everything really comes down to how well we break out the puck. And to your point, because the Bruins were able to do it effectively, able to do it quickly, they had guys in the right spots. They were able to go tape to tape. They were moving their feet. They did not have a big issue with that. And this is against a Leafs team that is starting to try and change some of its identity. It's not necessarily a forechecking oriented team, or it hasn't been in the past, but that's what Craig Berube is asking from his team a little bit more of. That's part of the reason that the Bruins were as effective as they were. How many times can you remember during the course of that game where the Bruins were hemmed in or the Bruins had some issues getting the puck out? They didn't spend a whole lot of time in their own zone. And again, to go back to the Leafs, and I think also with the team that the Bruins are going to face off against to close out their homestand, the Philadelphia Flyers, who heading into the action, they're near the bottom of the league offensively, and that's also the case with the Leafs. And both of those teams will tell you, we just have not had the puck in the offensive zone enough, and they've had to defend too often. The Bruins were able to flip the script against the Leafs.
Yeah, that was a big problem for the Bruins, right? They were defending way too much, and they weren't being patient on the offensive end, and we saw things, again, turn around on Saturday. And another thing, staying disciplined, staying out of the penalty box. They took 4 minor penalties, but it didn't seem like they were the how do I want to say it? They weren't bad penalties. They didn't stick out to me as bad penalties from what I can remember in that game, John.
No, you're going to take penalties.
Yeah.
They are going to happen. You have to make sure that you limit or eliminate the ones that are preventable. And if memory serves in that game, the Bruins had to kill off a 5-on-3 during the course of that first period.
Oh, by the way, Jeremy Swayman, a couple of unbelievable saves on Matthews and Nylander.
He was awesome. Oh. He's been terrific. The goaltending is not the Bruins issue here early in the season. We really haven't talked about it. I
mean, honestly, the most talk that we've had about goaltending is when he didn't have a contract yet. That's right. What we talked about it. We haven't had to really talk about it because it hasn't really been a storyline. He's been good.
No, and as the season is going to progress, now we can maybe turn our attention to how they're going to try and use both of those guys. But I thought the penalty killing took a big step forward. They were 3 for 3. They limited the amount of times that they were in the box. It's about when you're taking these penalties, what type of penalties they are, who are the guys that are going into the box. And the Bruins did a much, much better job with that, especially against a Maple Leafs team, as you point out. Yeah, they came in and they were struggling on the power play. They're going to figure it out. You just didn't want them to figure it out on Saturday night.
All right, you're watching or maybe listening to the Hockey Hub podcast. Thanks for watching. If you are on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitch, you can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, iTunes, talking about the Bruins and their win over the Maple Leafs, and not just the win itself, but what it could mean moving forward for this team. And obviously, we're just not used to seeing the Bruins get out of the gate this slowly. And it's been a long time since we've seen a losing record, even this early in the year for the Bruins. But they're it looks like the Maple Leafs, could be a springboard to better play for them moving forward. We'll see what happens against the Flyers on Tuesday, and again going on the road against Carolina and Philadelphia as well. But despite all the sort of negativity early on, right? Because it hadn't been a great feeling around the team because of the way that they were playing, and that trip out west, it was really up. Left a sour taste in their mouths, and obviously the first game of the homestand against the Stars. So, to see Jim Montgomery. Again, I mentioned the Saturday Sound on Nesson, where we had Matt Poitras mic'd up. We have Jim Montgomery mic'd up as well, where he announces the starting lineup. And listen to his introduction. If you missed it on Saturday, here it is.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to the TD Garden and your starters for your Boston Bruins tonight. On right wing, from Toronto, number 51. At center from Boston, Tommy Coyle. Your captain, Brad Marchand. On right defense, number 25. Set number 27 is going, and in the nets is the Sway Dog. Let's go.
Judd, that doesn't sound like a head coach that's been frustrated with his team's play, a 3-game losing streak. It sounded like a guy who was having a great time. It actually reminded me of the old PA announcer at Fenway Park, Sherm Feller, did it for many, many, many years. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to Fenway Park. That was Jim Montgomery did that, and I thought that stood out to me and to you as well, because in our pre-show meetings we have these sort of discussions, and you wanted to talk about that, and I thought it was a great point, because it's like, all right, well, all of a sudden, this sort of weight lifted, it seemed like, in the room. And it's like, hey, you know what, boys? Go out there, play free and easy. Let's go. And you follow your leaders.
And what's one of the things that was talked about in the first few weeks of the season, that Jim Montgomery didn't really like the energy or the attitude around the team. And he was the guy who wanted to lead the charge and help change that. And when I heard it, the first thing I thought of was P.T. Barnum. That he was exactly the ringleader of the circus.
The greatest show.
But I think you could definitely tell that he and the team were in a different mood. So Saturday morning, get in the suit, go to the morning skate, sitting down, and sure enough, even before Montgomery starts his scrum, he starts carving up my suit. I'm like, all right, the coach is ready to go. And just a quick backstory. So when I first started in the minors, and I'm sure everybody has a few things. Well, you're a TV guy. I'm an old radio guy. But, Adam, I'm sure that there are a few things maybe in your closet where you're like, I don't know if this still works anymore. This is kind of old. So I had a lot of that stuff in my closet. So what I would do is, if I had a question about it, I would wear it to the morning skate. I would jump in right in the middle of the room with the team. And if I got carved, it was time for that to be donated. If not, I'm like, okay, we can keep this in the rotation a little bit more. So apparently with that suit in particular, I don't know if I'm going to keep it in the rotation for this year. Because he had asked, he's like, I think what he asked, he's like, nice suit. Are you wearing that tonight? And I said, no, I think I'm going to go home and change. And he said, that might be a good idea. That's definitely a radio suit.
Wow. Judd, I got to go back to what you said about back in the day. You used to wear your suits was it morning skates?
Well, it could be any article of clothing, So if it was to
get
sweater,
a sense of if
or
whether or not
whatever,
you should keep it.
Oh yeah!
Wow,
because
that's bold, man.
You knew immediately as soon as you walked in. If Adam, I tell you what, you could probably do it now with the Bruins. If you walked in with whatever you're wearing and you had a question about it, someone in that room is going to give you some feedback on what they think of it. I guarantee it.
Well,
someone is going to do it.
See, I don't think you even need to go that far nowadays, man. You got social media. All you have to do is wear something, that's questionable, and people will call you out on it. Now, you talked about me being a TV guy. Yeah, I've been a TV guy for 2 decades. And social media has been a thing for, I don't know, a little bit more than a decade. And it's really become a big part of what we do now. And so people are not afraid to speak their minds about what you're wearing. And I'll tell you, I have a jacket, and it's still in my closet because it's one of those, and I'm glad we're talking about this, by the way. It's one of those jackets that you either love it or you hate it. And nobody has been in the middle. Right? Nobody's been like, oh, yeah, it's okay.
Have you worn it to a morning skate?
I've worn it on air. I've been rinkside with it.
Okay.
And I wore it last year, and I got compliments on social media. I got people saying, burn that thing. And I also got one guy, it's the Caddyshack, or a nice hat. You get a bowl of soup with it, right? Like the line from Caddyshack.
Yes.
Yeah, that was somebody dropped that on me too. So I don't think you need to necessarily go into the room, but I never thought of that. I think that's a genius way to sort of, see what works and what doesn't.
That's usually, here, for those guys in particular, I'm going to date myself. So when I started, in the old International Hockey League, this was prior to any social media being out there. And these guys, listen, they don't have a vested interest. This is unfiltered. They're not necessarily watching, but they're going to give you their opinion for the most part.
That's awesome.
So if you walk in with that jacket, like I understand you did it on television, which is bold, walk into the room and just see if anybody gives you a reaction. And somebody might not. It may depend on what's going on. Maybe they're thinking about either the game at hand or the practice at hand. But wear it. Actually, don't do it on a game day. Do it for a practice. Just walk in. You're going to have most of the people there.
Yeah.
Somebody is going to say something. And at that point, that will give you a better idea whether or not this is a good thing or a bad thing to wear.
Yeah. People have gotten on me for wearing my shirts a little too tight, from time to time because, I like to, clang and bang in the gym, Judd. You know what I mean? Like, this.
See, Adam, like my line, it's automatically, like whenever there's any comment toward me, it's like, hey, they put anybody on TV now that I got the job.
Yeah. Well, the
I'm an old radio guy, hey, I have so many excuses already built in. I don't know what yours are. I already got mine.
Yeah. You try to get ahead of it with the self-deprecation, which I respect, but at the same time, I'm thinking about some of the stuff I wore earlier in my career. I can't get off this topic. I had some yell. I will say too, just to put a bow on this real quick because I know we want to move on. When I first started in Portland, Maine, obviously when you're in this business, when you're first starting out, you're not making a ton of money, right? Like you sometimes you have 2 jobs, like I did first. So I was very grateful. So there's somebody that gave me a few of his suits, somebody in the business, and I'll name him too because he's a friend of mine, Butch Stearns, has worked in the market for a long time, and he gave me a bunch of ties, bunch of suits, bunch of shirts, and I was extremely grateful for it. With that said, there were a couple of things in there that I ended up wearing that people were like, "What are you doing, dude? Like, come on!" And so that was my first experience getting called out for wearing stuff like that. But nowadays, I have my wife who has stopped me before I left the house. Be like, no. No.
You and me both.
Yeah,
you and me both. And I think the last thing on this is. I loved hearing it from Jim Montgomery. I think, anytime that you're getting that type of ribbing or getting carved like that, I take it, I take that as a good thing.
Yeah, of course.
I love that good-natured stuff, and he feels comfortable enough to be able to do that. So I really enjoy it. I want to make sure that's clear. So I loved it, but you could sense the type of mood that he was in, his team was in, and they played like it against Toronto.
I wonder if he's going to sing Happy Birthday to you again this year.
Oh, gosh.
You remember that last year? Of course you do. What am I saying? Of course you remember. He sang Happy Birthday to Judd Sirott in the media scrum. That was morning skate, too. It wasn't just a practice
I remember
day.
that.
Yeah, that was awesome.
I remember that.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Anyway, so we talk about Jim Montgomery, and we talked about the lineup changes. A lot of different forward lines for the Bruins. The D pairs have changed, but the forward lines are the ones that really been mixed up. Outside of the fourth line, which again, against the Stars, Cole Koepke got moved up, but then in game he went back to the fourth line, so that line has remained intact. That top line has been, tinkered with a little bit, but now that's intact once again. So, it's really the second and third lines that have been changing on the reg. And, we had our first alternative broadcast of the year on NESN Plus and streaming on NESN 360. It was a great success. Andrew Raycroft hosting, Patrice Bergeron, Tuukka Rask, and Adam McQuaid stopped by as well, which was pretty cool. But during the game, Razor had asked about the forward groups.
Line changes, and when you do move guys around, does it click right away, or what's
Not
the
always.
focus? A lot of communicating.
Yeah, a lot of communication. I think when you're doing that as for the coaching staff, I think they're looking for simplicity. Simplifying your game. A lot of shots, getting to the net. Cycling, like the easy stuff, like the details, the stuff that you take care of, and brings you to like the goals and the result, right? Cause I think sometimes when you're forcing plays, you try to think about results. You don't focus on the details that get you there.
I heard Tuukka go, ooh, and that was during the Stars game. He had a couple of ooh moments, unfortunately, for the Bruins in that game. But as far as what Patrice Bergeron was saying, you're trying to simplify your game. And that's, what have we said? The fourth line. They're playing simple, right? And that's what you want out of your fourth line. It's what's led to success for them. But early on, Jim Montgomery's tried to find the right combinations, and I think Patrice Bergeron obviously hit the nail right on the head.
First of all, listening to Bergie, he sounds like a coach.
Yeah.
That could have come right out of Jim Montgomery's mouth. Certainly, that's going to be some of the stuff he's going to talk about through the entire season. It's stuff he already talked about at the beginning of the season. But the other thing that kind of stuck with me that Bergeron had mentioned, and by the way, what a terrific grouping for the unobstructed views.
No kidding.
That Bergeron talked about communication. And as some of these line combinations start to get changed up, that there needs to be more. Pavel Zacha talked about it with his line with Elias Lindholm and David Pastrnak. Pasternak's talked about it. I talked with Elias Lindholm prior to the game against the Philadelphia Flyers. He realizes that there needs to be more communication on the ice. There has to be more talk so everybody can have a better idea of getting on the same page. So I think that is all part of it. But it continues to be a work in progress here for the Bruins. Yes, I totally agree with Bergie where he talks about the head coach wants to see a little bit more simplicity, and then from that, some of the results will flow. But I think the communication also has to be better. The other thing that just kind of popped into my head is when you have skill players in particular, in order for that skill to creep into their game and really come out of their game, they have to do those little things. Simplicity certainly helps that, but if you're able to do that on a much more regular basis, that's when you start to see the skill plays and the skill players start to shine.
Everything's connected too, Judd, right? I mean, we've talked about the process and the habits and details, staying out of the penalty box, not committing so many turnovers. It's all connected when it comes to what we're talking about right now. And, they lead the league, with 48 minors taken this year, right? I think that's still leading the league, unless the Sharks had, unbelievable game where they just spent the entire game in the penalty box. But they lead the league in that department, and as a result, they have had, I think they're the second fewest minutes 5-on-5 in the league. Is that something that I see? They haven't played a lot of 5-on-5. I'll just say that. They still lead the league in penalty minutes. They haven't played a lot of 5-on-5, which contributes to a lot of what we're seeing. Maybe the inconsistent play with these lines. They're not getting a lot of time together. And we've seen obviously after you're on a power play or you kill a penalty, the lines get jumbled up in the game immediately afterwards. And so as a result, you're just not seeing the same groupings that started the game together all that often because of the penalties that they're taking.
It changes everything, depending on what happens. Let's say you get scored against, but let's assume that you didn't. Well, David Pastrnak doesn't kill penalties. Matt Poitras doesn't kill penalties. So what does the rotation look like? Typically, after the Bruins finish a kill, David Pastrnak will typically be the first guy that hops over the boards.
Yep.
And the more penalties you take, the less he's going to be on. The other thing that Pastrnak had mentioned is that early in the season, he's taken too many penalties. I want to say through the first, leading up to the Toronto game, he had taken 7 minor penalties. All of last year, he had taken 16. 16, and he already had 7, so nearly halfway there. So it certainly hurts him if he's in the box. It hurts the team if he doesn't get an opportunity to step onto the ice. But it certainly changes a lot of that rotation. And during the course of that game against the Maple Leafs, the other thing that started to happen as the game progressed is that Justin Brazeau went up and Matt Poitras went down. And part of that was because of the penalties. Jim Montgomery had talked about that, and some of that was situational play. And Poitras worked back from second line right wing to third line center. What it's going to look like going forward, I'm not necessarily sure. You still have Tyler Johnson, who is still hanging around, continues to practice with the team. The team is going to go on an upcoming road trip here following the game against the Flyers. Bruins, as you point out, going to Carolina, going to Philly. Then they got a back-to-back game, and they're going to come back on Sunday and see the Seattle Kraken. Will we see Tyler Johnson at some point? The other guy that we really haven't mentioned is Riley Tufte. Went on waivers, cleared, went down. So some space has been created. Is that enough to get Tyler Johnson onto the roster and into the lineup? And if he does go in the lineup, who comes out?
Yeah. I mean, that's obviously looming questions for the Bruins in terms of, Tyler Johnson. We've mentioned a number of times Danton Heinen, the example of the PTO, and he ends up signing his contract. He signed his contract on October 30th, right? Here we are. This podcast drops on October 29th. So we're getting to be around the same time where Danton Heinen came into the mix, and you sort of wonder if Tyler Johnson's going to be into the mix and where is he going to play. And we've talked about his versatility, his ability to play center, his ability to play wing. Could he slide up to that right wing with Charlie Coyle and Brad Marchand at some point? Maybe Justin Brazeau is a revelation there. Obviously, they're still looking for that somebody to step up and fill that void. And again, you talked about a number of different guys. You're kind of waiting for them to emerge, especially guys who had breakout seasons last year, and Trent Frederick. And Morgan Geekie especially hasn't registered a point, or is that correct still?
He's got 1 assist, I think.
He's got 1 assist. I think he did pick up his first assist. That was actually against the Maple Leafs. So, you're waiting for a couple of these guys to step up and emerge and kind of pick up where they left off last year. And we haven't seen that so far, but yeah, it is going to be interesting to see if Tyler Johnson is in the mix and is with the Bruins before the end of the month, which could be either the game against Flyers or the game against the Hurricanes.
And Adam, one more thing. So if you look back at the ice time, if I look back at Matt Poitras' ice time, he got 11 minutes and 24 seconds as I look at that. I think it's hard as a 20-year-old to be able to develop your game playing that much. And for Jim Montgomery, his job is twofold. He needs to develop Matt Poitras at the NHL level, but he's got to win games. So he has to put the players in the right spot that allows him to do that. So I think if Poitras continues to get those type of minutes, it may be best for him to go down to the American League and play 20 minutes, playing all those situations, playing offensive and defensive roles, get pucks out, get pucks in, make plays, play on the power play, maybe kill penalties. Either way, to play in all sorts of situations. I think the third line in particular, because they gave him a look on the second line. And if you're going to play on that second line, as we talked about with Brazeau, you're going to face some really good players on the other side. How well do you do defensively? For a lot of teams, certainly with younger players, they can shelter them a little bit depending on what's going on in the game on the third line because Matt Poitras is not a checker, and the Bruins don't want to turn him into a checker. I've seen that before. But so you can play him on the third line. But is that what is best for his development and what is best for the team. And I'm sure that that's one of the things that Don Sweeney and his group, Jim Montgomery and the coaching staff, that they're thinking about here going down the stretch. The sample size is still very small, but a guy like Tyler Johnson, if you're going to wedge him into your lineup, he is more accustomed as a guy who's been around for 12 seasons in the NHL and won 2 Stanley Cups, how to play in those situations, whether it's at center, at wing, whether it's moving up to play in the top 6 or playing in the bottom 6. So that's one of the things that I think that we're going to have to watch for here in the next couple of weeks.
Matt Poitras not going to be a fourth-line guy, right?
No.
I mean, he projects to be a top 6. So that's somebody that you'd want playing, to your point, meaningful minutes down in Providence, get that sort of experience.
And he did some good things, by the way, not to cut you off, Adam. He did some good things, certainly, against the Maple Leafs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would go as far as to say, he's done good things, in at times in every game that he's played this year. And again, great start against the Kings. You're thinking that, all right, well, this is going to be interesting to see, if he can take his game to yet another level after what we saw last year from him in 33 games. But, maybe more development is needed. Maybe Providence is the place for him. But right now he is with the Boston Bruins and Tyler Johnson. We'll see how that plays out. So, next up for the Bruins, a date with the Philadelphia Flyers. This is a Flyers team sort of surprised everybody last year, I think, by making a run for a postseason spot. They had 87 points last year, Judd. Obviously, they had the situation with their goaltender Carter Hart and the legal issues, and so that that was a big storyline in Philadelphia. In terms of this year, they've gotten off to a slow start. They're a rebuilding team. They had lost 6 in a row. They bounced back with a surprising win over the Minnesota Wild, who got off to a great start this year. They beat them 7-5, a Wild team that was tied for fewest goals allowed per game to begin the year. Hung 7 on them. They lost to the Canadiens 4-3 on Sunday, the second of a back-to-back. So you get to play this Flyers team a couple of times this week, Judd.
The Bruins, I think, they're going to see a Flyers team that under John Tortorella is going to be competitive from start to finish. Even in their last game prior to the Bruins game, that was a team that was down 4-1, scored 2 quick goals late against Montreal, and they made it 4-3 with just under 2 minutes left before losing that game in regulation. Going back to the Flyers goaltending situation, that's been an issue for them, but I think the way they defend, and it's difficult. I haven't had a chance to see a lot of the Flyers here early on, but this team is dead last in defense, dead last in save percentage here early in the season. But they've got some talented, skilled players up front. We're going to see Matvei Michkov, who could be one of the favorites for the Calder Trophy that goes to the Rookie of the Year. Travis Konechny's a really good player. Owen Tippett is a good player who's gotten off to a very sluggish start. Last year, I think, Adam, they may have surprised some people by playing meaningful games as late as they did in the regular season. In talking to some of the Flyers people and some of their personnel people during the preseason, because the Bruins saw them twice, this is a team that is still going through a rebuilding process. So I don't think that they're under any expectations to make the playoffs this year. Would they like to play some more meaningful games? Yes, but this is not a team that figures itself a playoff team at this point. And what I think will be interesting, and we don't know just yet, is who's going to start in net for the Bruins in that game. Jeremy Swayman to start to play a little bit more consistently. We have not seen Joonas Korpisalo play since he picked up the victory against the Colorado Avalanche. And as the schedule starts to pick up, and you're going to be in a sequence where you're going to hit the road, play at Carolina, and then you've got Philly and Seattle back-to-back, you're going to see Korpisalo at some point with 3 games and 4 nights. How does Jim Montgomery start to work his goaltending rotation? How often are we going to see Joonas Korpisalo?
I love the goalie rotation talk. It's something that we talk about with Jeremy Swayman and Linus Ullmark, and it became, it's just every other game, and that's it. But now we actually have something to talk about where you're not really sure what it is at this point. And we're in uncharted territory with Korpisalo and Swayman being the duo. I honestly thought that if the Bruins had played well in Nashville, Judd, and I think I mentioned this on our phone call on Sunday when we were talking about the show, I thought that if the Bruins put together a solid 60 minutes on on Tuesday in the final game of the trip against the Predators that you were going to see Korpisalo on Thursday against the Stars. And I know that you had said, well, probably not, or maybe not, because, again, against a very good Stars team. But I can't imagine it's ideal to have 2 weeks between games. I mean, and that's what it'll end up being. It'll be, if he starts against the Flyers, which we think he will, it'll be 13 days between games. I can't see that as ideal.
I have not had a long discussion with the goalie coach, Bob Essenza, who maps this out with Jim Montgomery and how he chooses to do that. The other thing that is different for the Bruins this year than really has maybe in the last few years, even going back to when Tuukka Rask was on the roster, is now you have a number one goaltender. It's not 1A, 1B, which is what it was with Ullmark and Swayman. So how does that change things around? The other thing that Bob Essenza has liked to do is, okay, I'm going to play my number one guy a lot, but I'm not going to play him to the extent that he is worn out. So when we really need him, he's not going to be as ready as we'd like him to do. So if Jeremy Swayman, if he wants to play 55 games, okay, math is not my strong suit. That puts 27 games on Joonas Korpisalo. So how much are you going to figure him into the mix? He's played 2 games thus far here of the team's, first 9.
Hasn't played a home game yet.
He has not played a home game yet. So you know that I'm going to say you're 98% sure, unless something weird happens, you're not going to play Jeremy Swayman in back-to-back games. So you're going to see him at some point either in Philly or against Seattle at home. How do they do that? For some goaltending coaches, what they can do is, okay, if I'm going to play you in Philadelphia and I'm going to play Jeremy Swayman on Sunday against Seattle, I'm going to give Joonas Korpisalo a look at the Flyers first. And this is something we're going to have to watch. Yeah. You could potentially see him at home against the Flyers, see Swayman on the first game of the road trip against Carolina, see Korpisalo again in Philadelphia, and have Swayman ready for the Seattle Kraken. That could be a way that it plays out this week.
See, I'm wondering when they're going to play the Senators. Right? I haven't looked that far ahead of the schedule.
That's going to be Swayman.
Well, it'll be Ullmark Swayman is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Right? So that's what I'm looking forward to. And I also don't know, if Korpisalo will have an opportunity to play the Senators on a back. I don't know if they have a back-to-back,
I haven't looked that far ahead. The other thing with the Bruins is,
I'm just curious.
That this will be the Bruins' first back-to-back set of the season.
Correct.
So the Philadelphia Flyers, the team that the Bruins are playing, they've already played 3 back-to-backs. The Bruins haven't been in that situation. So the schedule, in that sense, has been favorable.
I'm looking for that Ottawa game. I can't find it. I mean, people at home listening are like, why are you...
I think there's something psychological going on around there.
Yeah.
Or maybe you just don't want to go up to Ottawa.
Yeah.
You don't even go up to Ottawa. You go up to Canada. So hopefully get that building downtown at some point.
Saturday, November 9th. All right, so there you go. All right, there it is.
It's coming up.
It's in Boston. All right.
Hopefully Linus Ullmark stays healthy. He's had some health issues.
He has had some health issues to start the season. I can't believe it took me that long. I had to my producer Brendan had to get into my ear to tell me when I went right by it. You know why I did it, Judd? Because I was actually on the Senators schedule, not the Bruins, so I'm looking for at Ottawa. And that's why I couldn't find at Ottawa. That makes sense.
Solid.
Oh, solid host work right there by this guy. Let's wrap it up. That'll wrap things up for the Hockey Hub podcast. Judd, good conversation. Once again, look forward to chatting again with you next week. Next episode will feature the legendary Andy Brickley. Brick will be in the house. We'll do some Hockey East talk as well, some Providence men's college hockey. This was a Bruins-centric episode, but
you got to talk about his ace.
Yeah, I know. How about that fourth hole-in-one for Andy Brickley?
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. That guy's a machine. Anyway, we'll talk to Brick. Yeah, I'll definitely talk to Brick about that next time. Thanks for joining us on the Hockey Hub podcast. See ya.